Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. So today I am going to do audience questions. I won't be lecturing today. I'm just going to take your questions from the audience. So how you get your question answered is actually by going to the link in the chat or the link in the description, and you just go to that site. It's my website, and there is a question form. So all questions will be selected from that form. And that's just because the moderators have a difficult time, obviously, grabbing questions from Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. We don't want your question lost. So that's how we've streamlined the questions. So let's just dive right in and see what you have for me already. Okay. All right. So the first question is actually a member question. I won't be revealing the member names. I'll just be saying member for member questions. So I'm curious about your thoughts on the spiritual implications of voting for president. During the pandemic, you talked about not giving consent, and refusing to do so offered certain spiritual protections. Does voting actually give our energetic spiritual consent to the candidate? Yes, I have a video on my YouTube channel. I think it may still be there. YouTube was going in and flagging a lot of the videos that mention certain topics, but the gist of that comment was based on giving consent for one of these. And that is sort of a direct ingestion of something, right? When it comes to politics, when it comes to, voting for president or voting for anyone, it's kind of a more difficult and complex situation as to just giving your consent. I mean, if the argument is consent, I mean, you're giving your consent to a much greater degree by paying taxes, right? So when we pay taxes, we're not just giving our, consent to the system, we're funding it, okay? When we drive on the roads, we are giving our consent, if that's the argument. When we use power, electricity, all of this is part of the system that we are in. We are consenting in that way every day to it. And that's why this is so frustrating. But we are so embedded in this that the actual real way to face corruption and get ourselves into a better position is not to just withdraw from it. I mean, the technology alone that these elite groups have make it impossible to go hide out somewhere, right? So we have to beat this by using the system. The foundation of America is based on a covenant of freedom that is based in natural law, right? It's actually kind of a spiritual concept, actually the first of its kind in human history as we know it. So it's really more of, if this is really about removing corruption and returning to a free society, or actually having one for the first time, it's really about working within what we have while creating things on the side that pressurize that system. So in my opinion, it's about creating stronger communities. It's about taking as much responsibility as we can, but then also understanding that, we are giving our consent and our money towards this. How much of your money has gone to foreign countries for evil deeds? It's that aspect that is much more concerning, really. So if we think that just by not voting that somehow you're not consenting, well, are you paying taxes? Are you driving on the roads? Are you using electricity? Right? We are in this system, and the most pragmatic, the most effective, the most realistic is to return this country to its original vision, which is one of freedom. Now, the people who are trying to change the Constitution, change the Bill of Rights, that's a different story. That's not America. Okay, that's not American, that's not America, that's not the true ideal of the West even. That's just greedy, parasitic people that are trying to actually destroy that so that they can ultimately make a regressive push towards authoritarianism. Now, neither side is perfect, okay? Neither side is perfect. That's obvious, But if it comes to consent, you're giving much more consent by funding it with your tax dollars than by simply, voting someone in or participating in voting, right? Okay, this is another member question. Hi, Gigi. When I was in Rome and came across the temple of the Vestal Virgins, I had a very deep knowing that I had experienced this role in a previous lifetime or lifetimes. However, when I returned home, I was unable to find very much information or research on their existence, especially from an esoteric perspective. Your thoughts? I love this question because one of the reasons why I haven't been as active on YouTube lately is actually because I'm working on some massive projects. And one of the projects is actually called Revival, and it is set to be released this month. And Revival is all about the Venus mysteries and the feminine aspect of the mysteries, which includes, we're going to talk about the Vestal Virgins. We're going to talk about the Melissae. We're going to talk about priestesses. We're going to talk about the history of feminine spirituality. We're going to go very, very deeply into it this fall and winter. So I'm very, very excited to present that series to you this fall and winter. And I'm also going to be releasing course series and workshops and much more interactive stuff like that this fall, winter as well, which has kept me incredibly busy over the past month and a half preparing all of that. So there is this idea in Rome of the Vestal Virgins, and there's very little about them, but what we do know is that they were basically temple priestesses that were responsible for keeping the flame of the Holy Spirit alive. And it was how it works in the feminine mysteries. It's actually very different than the masculine mysteries. There's a lot of overlap due to there being a basic spiritual science that overlaps everything. But when it comes to the actual human initiation process and the actual way in which spirit moves through the different genders, there's a difference between how women would gather and operate psychically and how men would gather and operate psychically. So in the sisterhoods, one of the roles that was very important was that holy women would basically, who would be attuned for this their whole life, probably in past lives as well. One of the roles was to basically purely radiate the Father. So purely radiate God. And that would become basically the foundation, the spiritual nourishment and the spiritual foundation of that entire community. So as I'm going to reveal in my new series, which is called Revival, women actually had a very strong spiritual role in society as being the very spiritual sort of foundation, emitting the Father's presence, the Father's energy. And the males would participate more so in statecraft and giving that life and activity and building structure so that was realized. So that was sort of the traditional. It doesn't mean that women can't participate in statecraft or anything, or men can't be intuitive. It's not about that. It's about understanding first the initial roles, especially going back in time, in which they were very distinct. So the way that the female body and the energy bodies are arranged is different in men than in women. And so the father can actually enter into the etheric body of the female, and so can spiritual masters in a very specific way. So can dark entities too, though, right? Like other stories I'll get into in that series. And that actually creates something new, a new substrate, which is like the sun. Okay, so the Father enters Mary, right? Mary produces the Holy Son, or a different consciousness for the planet. That is a union of God and the Mother. So this is the deep heart center of the feminine mysteries, and this has been lost simply because we have moved into a patriarchal cycle. And so during a patriarchal cycle, it becomes very important to understand and deal with the masculine aspect of consciousness. during that time, that becomes so hyper-focused and important for human development that the feminine aspect gets pushed aside. But now we're actually seeing a revival of the feminine mysteries. It's very important that these mysteries come forward, that we understand them, because they are going to be the stream that confronts the Mars impulse, or in my work, the fallen Mars impulse, which is the fall of the masculine consciousness through lies about sort of the planet Mars, but also technology, technocracy, and that's the fall of the masculine consciousness. So we need the Venus mysteries, and we need this feminine aspect to rise very strongly in society to counteract that. Because in a sense, the male impulse will not fully be able to do that. Okay? So that will involve us needing to truly understand what the Vestal Virgins are, which again, were very similar to in the Celtic culture, the idea of Bridget's maidens that would keep the flame going. The flame is the Holy Spirit, which is the temperament of any civilization, is basically based on a kind of spiritual energy that's like a nourishment that is produced by women, actually. Okay, Diana. Okay, 2 questions. In spiritual circles, it seems people increasingly use, quote, the universe and ask the universe, or the universe gave me, etc. Why is this? To me, it feels off, something missing. What is it? And then lately, there's a lot of talk about the plasma field explained as being closer to Prime Creator. Any reflections of this? Okay, so when you're looking at something when you're looking at the spiritual world through a materialistic lens, you get sort of a strange and warped view of the spiritual planes and of spiritual beings. So what ends up happening is you get these teachings that basically say the cosmos is a simulation that's centered around a human being being a god, affecting the simulation. So a lot of these ideologies, eventually, when you draw them to a logical conclusion, make humanity God. And human beings are gods, or God. God can even be shown as imperfect, right? Chaotic universe, and human beings are gods responsible for bringing order to the chaos. And that's an inversion. God is perfect, and humanity is actually flawed in the sense that we are incomplete. And we are working upon evolving into our highest expression. So that's how we are incomplete. In esoteric Christianity, that's just called sin. But that's the meaning of that on the occult level. So you also get weird scientific explanations of the cosmos that don't include any kind of humanness. So how the cosmos actually is ordered is actually we are within beings. So we are beings within beings, within beings, within beings, within beings. That's why when you go even into the earliest, like Native American accounts, or the earliest even European accounts, Asian accounts, they usually talk about being in the mind of God. Think about the Indian accounts, the Hindu accounts describing being in the mind of Brahma, okay? So how it's always traditionally been described is that we are beings within beings, within beings, within beings. And so the cosmos is actually a being. It's actually an entity. And why that's important not to lose that is because when you don't have that, you get an inversion, and suddenly the cosmos operates as like a machine. You get a machine cosmos that operates as a bunch of waves and particles. That's just like you turning on a magnifying glass and then looking at your arm and then realizing that it's a bunch of electrons and atoms and protons, and thinking this is all there is. It's a materialistic perspective that has yet to actually transcend the material plane and the spiritualization of the material plane, thinking that you're having some spiritual revelation when you're not. Because if somebody was actually understanding, how the cosmos works, you would immediately see it was made up of beings, and that we operate within a being, just like how There are elemental beings that actually make up our body. And our being is actually a series of elemental beings. And even within us, there are bacteria and there are different creatures that even live within us. So actually, we're living in great beings. And if it's not described that way, then it's going to lead you into transhumanism eventually, because the individual, what produces this ideology is an externalization, a hyper-materialization and a hyper-externalization of consciousness. So you have to eventually understand that everything is within you. God is within you. Everything is within you. And when you go inward and you truly individuate and go inward, you begin to then see that everything else is beings as well. But if you refuse to go inward and you keep projecting your spirituality outside of you and going outside and become more materialistic, all you're going to do is think that the cosmos is a bunch of waves and particles and plasma, not realizing that that plasma that you see isn't plasma. That's an entity. That's a being. Okay, all those particles that you see are just particles. That's a being. That's an entity that we are operating technically within. And the teaching of that in occult science is the teaching of the spiritual hierarchies or the angelic hierarchies in Christian esoterica. Okay, this is a member question. It becomes more obvious every day that our healthcare and food production systems are completely toxic to our bodies. How do you envision Americans now and in the future carrying forth the torch of love and freedom in this environment? This is a great question, and I see that especially over the last 10 years, especially over the last 5 years, the world is kind of entering a crisis where it's completely obvious to us that we are underneath intense corruption from every single angle. There is an oligarchy that has been controlling healthcare. It's been controlling the government. It's been controlling every aspect of our lives, consolidating power and wealth until now we're starting to come head to head with it, right? And there's a little bit of a panic because it's like, how does David beat this Goliath, right? So what we have to do is we have to begin building within our communities and locally. We have to begin building our own food sources, our own food supplies. If you can have a garden, you should grow that. Okay, we have to begin localizing these things a lot more. And we also have to move more to natural gardening, biodynamic agriculture, things like that. But as I say this, it does not mean that you shouldn't participate at a federal level just because you're having a garden, just because you're building a strong community around you that's more independent of the federal government, that's more independent of the municipal government, doesn't mean that you shouldn't participate and toss your hat into the ring of all aspects of the system that after all you are using and that you are involved in, and that again has many different technologies that can overwhelm us if we're not directly participating in it, pressurizing those technologies to be properly legislated against, right? So I think that we have to begin to take more responsibility for our food supply. Of course, we have to take more responsibility of these things. We can't lean so much on obviously individuals that are corrupt, but we also have to be engaged at the executive level, because a lot of things that affect us get passed at that executive level. So we do have to try to stave off evil as much as we possibly can also through that wing as well. So we have to have a two-tiered approach. Member question. Some people I know are fully stuck in the Ahrimanic delusion of materialism. A few don't even want to consider that there could be higher worlds. Could this just be the mindset of their current incarnation? Or is it more likely the state of their I, or their higher self, or their individuality? What are things that one can do to help such people snap out of it? Well, it is really difficult when you have, especially people in your life that you love, that you adore, and you want to see the best for them. And you know that spiritually they are tapping into forces that could harm them, that will lead them down, the garden path. I think that has to be one of the most difficult things, is to love people and care about people, and to see them captured by certain ideologies, captured by lower astral forces. And it's difficult because there's actually really nothing that you can do to force someone to have a more balanced perspective or come more into alignment, because that individual has free will. All you can do is love that person, be there for that person in the most, mundane level, and, uh, try to connect with them where you can, where it doesn't get too deep, and when they're open, you can share what you think, you can share your heart. And if it ever becomes too difficult for you, you have every right to put up boundaries and remove yourself from that, because it's not your job to, save people at your own expense. It's not your job to, become completely anxiety ridden and worried and all that stuff, when you really have no control over whether a person wakes up or not. That's just going to be very bad for you. You have to protect yourself. You have to have boundaries, right? So if it does get really bad, you have to remove yourself from those situations so that you can take care of yourself and so that you can evolve properly, right? But you'd be surprised how much just being around people and just caring about them and listening to them and just loving them is exactly what's needed. I think sometimes we feel like we have to just argue all the time, or that, we can't be around people unless they hold every single ideology that we do. And it's this strange intolerance that we've had because we don't know how to deal with the corruption. And I think that it's best if we can be around people with different mindsets, and understand that, no, we may not be able to personally convince them of something higher today, but that by being able to be with people in a compassionate way has a great effect. Because when people are ready, they may think back to, I was around that person and they sort of told me that this would happen, or they told me that this wasn't going to feel good. And now I'm here, so maybe I should listen to them. Whereas if you're so harsh and and you're angry, then that's only going to feed people away from your away from that higher truth you feel they need to accept. And a lot of it is just based in, it's based in how much they are. A lot of it in this day and age is that, quite frankly, a lot of people have not individuated. They don't have their I well developed. They're operating in a tribal consciousness, in a group consciousness. They're basically operating in a hive mind out of fear and out of anxiety. They're not actually operating as an individual. A lot of the things that I see, whether it be from, this crisis a few years ago, whether it be politics, a lot of the very bad takes that in my opinion, that I see are driven because people are fearful and they're traumatized. And these are protective movements. They're movements based out of survivalism, based out of depression, based out of, low emotional states. They're not reasonable, a lot of these positions. And so this is what happens when people are in survival mode and they're overwhelmed, as they make bad decisions. They fall into ideologies that are harmful for them and harmful for others. Whereas when you can become an individual, when you can individuate, you're able to navigate complex situations a lot easier. So yes, when people fall into an Ahrimanic or Luciferic ideology, usually they're not individuals yet. They're following the herd. Okay, they're following the group. They're lemmings that are falling off a cliff because they have not yet learned to analyze things for themselves, to go against the crowd. It's okay to go against your family. It's okay to go against the people that you work with and have a different opinion. It's okay to go against what the government says, what a spiritual teacher says. That's your duty to do that. That's the only way you're going to have the fortitude to navigate anything difficult in your life. Okay. And you should, and that's not to say that you should fall into the Luciferic side of just always wanting to rebel for rebellion's sake, seeking freedom for freedom's sake, thinking that that's good. That's not what I mean. I mean, genuinely building up your own sense of discernment. Okay, member question. Can you discuss the differences between interdimensionals, multidimensionals, and extraterrestrials, and how, if they are able to interact with humans? I thought I had a pretty good grasp on this, but I all honesty feel all over the place about this. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. Okay. So, interdimensionals, multidimensionals, extraterrestrials. The reason why you're confused is because depending on the teacher you're listening to or the person that you're listening to, all of these words are used interchangeably for the same thing: beings that appear from the astral world and the physical world. So when you start getting into deep into the New Age, you start hearing interdimensional beings, multidimensional beings, ultra-terrestrial beings, and you start hearing all those words. That means that a being is coming from another dimension or is able to move between dimensions. Dimension, classically in spiritual science, is a plane, a spiritual plane. So when you go back into Rudolf Steiner, Helena Blavatsky, Theosophy, Anthroposophy, the Eastern mysteries, anything that you want to go into that is through the occult, a dimension is a plane. A plane is a dimension. Okay, so that's the problem is that in our modern times, we see people that are renaming things in a more scientific way in order to create a more objective view of the spiritual world, because religion is something that people have a bad taste in their mouth about. And some people find it, I think, challenging to go back and study the different esoteric traditions and use those terms because they are associated with Eastern wisdom or early Western wisdom. And they don't want that. They want something fresh. So they're creating and renaming basic things that have always existed, that we've always had language for, that we've always recognized. The problem is that doing this creates mass confusion in the audience for your students, because we're losing that bridge between classical esoterica, in which all of these concepts, by the way, already exist. There's nothing new under the sun. We're not discovering the NHI. We're not discovering, aliens or spiritual beings. What we're getting is new language, right? And that new language is actually partly coming forward in kind of a darker way. If you want to see the dark side of this change, is that it creates a new paradigm, a different paradigm, one that again is not rooted to anything that we've been using before. And this is like the concern about, it's not that you can't create new language for it, you can do whatever you want. But the problem is that this is also something that three-letter agencies do in order to create new religions, new belief systems, is you give it a different term. So if you want to separate and create like a UFO religion and control that narrative entirely, stop using the word UFO and change it to UAP, because the people that just come into that scene, the Generation Z, like the earlier generations that aren't familiar with a lot of the older stuff, they'll just use UAP, and they won't really be in the energy and in the right language to research it naturally, all the research that was done before that. So it's a way of creating a different system, is changing the language. Change the word interdimensional, or change the word alien or angel to NHI. Okay, this is a tactic that actually is a psychological tactic that creates a different stream. Okay, it's describing literally the same phenomenon is happening today and for thousands of years, that happened thousands of years ago. There's nothing new going on. It's just there's this huge push, right, by certain occult societies that want to gain control over human spirituality to rename these things. And we should be viewing spirituality more scientifically, right? We should be viewing it as more of a spiritual science more objectively. But that doesn't mean you change every single name and introduce an entirely new stream that, by the way, eventually always ends up hooking up to technology and alien god ideology and the Mars origin myth. That's usually where all of this ends up going, to technology being the impulse of our next phase of evolution, which is a lie, right? So when you talk about interdimensionals, multidimensionals, extraterrestrials, NHI, these are spiritual beings. A spiritual being is a multidimensional being. A dimension is a plane. So a being that appears from a different plane is also called an astral being, an astral entity. So we're looking at the astral world. The astral world is divided into two different categories. The lower astral plane, which is traditionally viewed as hell, okay? The higher astral plane, which is sort of the beginning of heaven or Devachan. That's the structure. And that's been the structure in every tradition for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There's no amount of scientific sounding language or renaming that's going to change that objective reality of the astral plane, and that these are astral beings. When you're talking about a being being multidimensional, you're talking about an astral being. The exception to that would be like a human being that has achieved Buddhaship or spiritual mastership that can appear and disappear, which is exceedingly rare, exceedingly rare. But there's also a science for that, which is called initiation science. Okay. So we already have a system and a science for all of this. It already exists. So be very careful about people wanting to change all the language. It's creating confusion. And you could say that part of it is just, again, a desire to create more of a sciencey system away from religion. I totally get that. But we need to include the historical and traditional teachings as well, if you want it to be complete, right? So an interdimensional is classically called an angel or a spiritual being or an astral being. In Celtic culture, sometimes they'd be called fairies, right? Like there's also demonic entities, which are lower astral beings. Those are called demons or jinn. So we already have a classification system for this. Why don't we just study that and learn that and understand that objectively, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and create all this different language? And it's all of this push is often coming through things like Gaia or the History Channel, or like 3-letter agents that are wanting to basically introduce advanced technologies and introduce aliens as gods and things like that. They're angels. They've always traditionally been portrayed as angels, as part of the spiritual hierarchies or angelic hierarchies. That and the dimensions are the planes. They're the traditional spiritual planes. And every plane can't even be viewed objectively. Not entirely. Only through understanding consciousness can we view it objectively, because every spiritual plane is also a different kind of consciousness. It's a level of initiation for human beings. So there's a proper way into these topics that is empowering for you, that is holistic because it acknowledges all of the prior systems' esoteric elements. That's where we need to go with this. That's going to be satisfying to you. That's going to give you the language and understanding to go into any system and understand it on an esoteric level. Okay? So that's what we need to know. And that's why you feel confused and why, why can't I grasp this? It's not you. It's that this is trying to create a different system. Often, again, whenever you follow this stuff that's about extraterrestrials, and sometimes even the language interdimensionals, but not necessarily interdimensional, could just also be used as angel, right? The different kinds of angels. Whenever you hear the people who channel aliens all the time and extraterrestrials and have these experiences, it always ends up being technology, oftentimes, that they want to eventually introduce to humanity. And humanity introduces through all of these devices that can heal your body, that you could hook your consciousness up to. And the next big step is not basically to build your glorified eternal body, right? It is and evolve out of samsara, or evolve out of the material plane, right? The next step is to be a technologically advanced culture. So this is where that stuff goes when you watch it to its logical conclusion. And the individuals that do not teach that way but say aliens, they're really just referring to angels, and they're confusing the terminology. So that's my opinion on that. Rhea, or Ray, could you share your visions pertaining the incarnation of Ahriman? How will this look like? Will this happen in our lifetime? And thank you for being a courageous voice of truth. Thank you, Rhea. So Ahriman, for those of you who don't know, if anyone here is new, the system that I use a lot is the Anthroposophical system, or Anthroposophy, which was actually created by Rudolf Steiner. And one of the things that Rudolf Steiner did was bring forward this sort of very deep teaching on evil, the mystery of evil. And he says that there's two aspects basically that would constitute, evil in humanity. One is Lucifer, and the other is Ahriman. For more information on this, you can check out my lecture on that, which is on this channel, or go to the Steiner archive or many of the other incredible individuals that have spoken on this. So Ahriman is basically, like, in normal conversation, Ahriman would be like the Antichrist. So in the anthroposophical system, Ahriman basically is the Antichrist. He's basically Satan. And so he's associated with the Saturnian Satan force. And so he is scheduled to incarnate very, very soon. So in esoteric Christianity, initiation science becomes very, very obvious. And the role of the beings in the cosmos become very obvious. And we see the incarnation of Ahriman, the incarnation of Lucifer before Christ. Then we see the incarnation of Christ over 2,000 years ago. And then now, about 2,000 or so years later, we're going to see the incarnation of the Antichrist. The Antichrist, again, is Ahriman. And Ahriman is also Mammon. Ahriman is the Persian word for the devil. So he's really about materialism and technology, the misuse of technology. Okay. And so in my opinion, now I'm going to now break away from Rudolf Steiner's direct work, and I'm going to now give you my opinion on that. So in my opinion, we are going to begin to see the Ahrimanic force in Ahriman take center stage around the year 2030, 2032. And that's when we're really going to see that begin. Okay. That's why I beg you to take all the stuff that's going on in the world right now very seriously, and especially at the political level, because what we really, really need coming into right now until that 2032, 2033, 2030 period, there's a reason why the World Economic Forum people keep pushing 2030, because they know a force from deep within the earth, from deep within the fallen center of the black sun, they know that he is coming. They know that there are forces that are going to be released from that sphere. They know that that's why they have planned it. That's the esoteric reason why they are using that time period. We have to prepare for that now, which means we have to have the right people at the executive level and the right people at the local level that can put safeties on the development of certain technologies, certain policies that can legislate properly, because that is coming. Okay, so that's going to start rising up, and there's going to be a great struggle for the next 4 years between two imperfect sides, really. Okay, then we're going to have to really the presidential term before that period. That's a very important thing for America and for the world, because that's where we need to be putting in all the safeguards, so that when this force does rise up and starts to influence during that period, we have to have certain safeguards put in place. Otherwise, it will not be very good. So walking away right now from society and thinking that you're going to get away from all the technologies that already exist is giving your power away. It's feeding that. We need to have the right shifts in the system to prepare for that. It's not prepared. It is nobody. I mean, did you see Congress trying to talk to Mark Zuckerberg about technology? They had no idea what a Facebook even was. You know, technology and, you know, AI and all of that is so it's so out in front of everyone that most people legislating have no idea what they're even talking about. They're legislating like it's 1983. Sorry, but they are. So we need to start having safeguards in place, because we have younger generations that are being brought up with an iPad in front of their face, a phone in front of their face, and technology to them is their life. Most of them are addicted to video games, they're addicted to technology, and they're pouring their energy into tech already. I mean, the forces know that the millennials and the older generations are just going to eventually die off. So this protections that we need to have are for the younger generations that are being shoved in front of computers, shoved in front of technology as the babysitter. They're addicted to it. This is it. It's we need to and we need to protect them and that, because there are forces that are in the technology. Okay, so that is just the mystery of the golem. That's the mystery of the homunculus. There's already a cult background for incarnating demonic entities into a machine, into a statue, into a mirror. Okay, this is just basic occult 101. Like, that's what dark magicians do. They incarnate demonic entities that they feed and summon for their personal power into things to have it become worldly power. That's it. That's what they do. So, in other words, it's very important how we think that it's about a lot of the mundane stuff, economics, housing, and it absolutely is. But we also need to have a very strong system of safeties in place for what is coming in 2030. Okay? And that's what I can say there at this point in time. And yeah. Okay, Cameron. Okay, I've previously asked questions on the topic of music being a spiritual force potentially. I am still attempting to find an accurate way to ask your opinion or insight on the job, work, play that music has as its own language in the growth, evolution, and transformation of human consciousness. Yeah. Well, the secret of music is the secret of sound, right? And acoustics. And that actually goes back to the beginning of human creation, which is in the beginning it was the word, and the word is God. So sound is part of that mystery. The mystery of the word is the mystery of sound, which is the mystery of music. Also, you'll find a lot of information in the mystery of the spheres, or the mystery of the music of the spheres. Also, you'll find a lot of information if you look up the importance of vowel sounding and vowel toning in the different occult systems, whether it be the Eastern mantra system, the Egyptian mantra system, like Ra, Ma, all that kind of stuff. That's all sound chambers. That's all to do also with the word and direct manifestation through sound, right? Through the throat, birth through the throat, the birth of life through the throat. That's all the mystery of sound. Parallels between the throat and the sacral center and the reproductive organs. That's another good thing that you can look into. And of course, if you clairvoyantly view angels or spiritual beings, a lot of the time what you'll see them doing actually is singing and toning. And that's always been like a weird, kind of like a weird vision of angels playing harps and playing music, and the god has his like lute. Who is that? The Greek Orpheus has his music. That's actually because sound is the foundation of our world, and you can actually begin to open certain chakra centers just through using vowel sounds. You can shift your consciousness by using vowel sounds. There's even obviously the weird black projects where you see different people creating these sound devices that have super low frequencies that give you like anxiety right away, or they make you feel sick or whatever it is, because sound actually is at the foundation of our being. So there's a couple avenues for you to look at in your studies. Member. Okay. I recently came across an article of a new pill that can reverse aging. It is currently under animal trials, and so far it has cured the cancer of one and may extend its life due to affecting the telomeres in the DNA. If brought to human trials, how does artificially extending your life affect your soul and spirit? Well, there's actually been several different treatments for cancer, for tumors, and they've, all been heavily suppressed. There's been a lot of different cancer treatments that are not chemotherapy, and they're kind of sad stories where there were alleged treatments, and then the people who had them got arrested or were sort of, murdered, went missing, or they say they're threatened and they just disappear. So it's not strange when you actually start, doing this research to realize that, we're being held back by a lot of greedy, dark people who are controlling the various systems. And there's been incredible cures that have been held back. When it comes to life extension, there's sort of different activities associated with life extension. The most notorious is definitely transhumanism, which more and more is kind of, I think, being called out as being, degenerate. But that's probably the most damaging for you, obviously. But I think that, I don't know what is in this pill, but I think that if there are natural ways to heal your body using things like herbs, using things like prayer, and healthy living, and sort of raising up your consciousness, I think that's beautiful. I think that we should embrace these things. However, the more synthetic the life extension becomes, the more dangerous it becomes, because it stops being about harmonizing with God, harmonizing with nature, and therefore harmonizing with your soul, right? And it becomes more about being a god, controlling yourself, controlling the world around you, and it can actually come about through fear of death. And so it's one thing if you're just wanting to be healthy and you're wanting to live a nice long life so you can be around your loved ones and so you can do your purpose and be healthy. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's wonderful. I think we should figure out the most optimal way we can operate as humans. But then the more synthetic it becomes, the more it's not really based in that. It's not really based in normal love. It's based in control. It's based in fear of death, which is different. It's different when you're extending your life because you're full of fear and you want total control over your environment at all times. And when you're just trying to be at optimal health, right? Think about the impulse behind why people want to do this, and you'll get a totally different outcome, totally different answer. And so ultimately, from the esoteric perspective, which considers all of your subtle bodies and your physical body, because we're not just a physical body. And I'm actually going to be going deeply into this in the course I'm going to be releasing in this fall. It's going to be free actually for members only. But I will be describing all the bodies and all of the bodies and how the bodies evolve and change and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely sign up, or at least sign up for the newsletter or whatever, to take part in that if you want a much deeper explanation. So ultimately, from the spiritual scientific perspective, the etheric body only has so much life in it. So ultimately, you're only going to live a certain amount of time, and that time is basically according to the life in your etheric body. So the etheric body is also called the life body. It's where the life is. So the physical body only has life energy because the etheric body is there and pulling into it spiritual forces, astral forces into it, prana. The physical body wouldn't even be here if the etheric body wasn't there, and then if the etheric body wasn't constantly being refreshed and rejuvenated by prana and astral energy, right? So we actually have to understand that. We have to understand the mysteries of the etheric body. So the etheric body only has enough life to support a human being for a certain time period. This is according to cosmic cycles. This is according to your karma, to your soul. So you really want to work with what's natural for you. So if you forcefully extend your life beyond the life you have coming from your etheric body, coming from the prana that you can actually channel, you will go insane. You will go crazy. You will go mad, and you will degenerate. You cannot extend your life beyond the life that already exists, like a time release capsule in your etheric body. There's a set amount of life you have. So when you do that, all you basically do is you physically extend your life by creating kind of a false energetic system that would in the anthroposophical cosmology root into the eighth sphere. That would actually reverse your system entirely, and you would go insane. So if people think that they're going to extend their life with transhumanism beyond what their etheric body of life can actually afford to them, you can look forward to being insane for what, hundreds of years, and being crazy. And your soul will basically be trapped inside of a drooling, crazy, insane body. Because again, the rest of your spiritual forces that you have decided to ignore to go into transhumanism have died. There's no nourishment, there's no life in you. You're trapped inside of a body that is now hooked up to machines and or the energy of the eighth sphere, and you'll slowly go mad and your energy will be absorbed into that system. So we don't get to play God. That's insanity, and you'll become insane if you try to force it too much, even if you try to do it too much in other ways, if you become too controlling about it. That will lead to madness. That will lead to insanity. And you can kind of see with people when they try to take too much control over their form for vanity reasons or for sick reasons, you do start to go insane because you're putting all that energy into control and fear rather than actually going inward and evolving properly. Okay. The next question is from KD. Do you have any recommendations for dealing with people in life who are under the influence of Lucifer, but not fully possessed? I am feeling torn between wanting to simply avoid them, on the other hand, thinking I should stay in contact with them while trying to embody Christ consciousness as much as possible. This is very similar to the question that we just answered, which was about what to do with people that you love that are sort of falling under negative influences. But ultimately, I would just make sure that whenever you're around them, you're not tired, you're not hungry, you're not irritated, and that you actually have enough energy to enforce your boundaries. It's okay to be around people who are, perhaps tapped into lower forces. Of course it is, but you just have to make sure that you're balanced and you're harmonious. And if you don't feel well, like if you don't feel like you have the energy, if you're tired, if you just had like a really bad week, I would say those are the relationships that you don't want to spend time with in those states. I'd say that if these are people in your life that are connected to those forces, I would say you can't be vulnerable around them. You have to go in when you feel energized. And the moment that you feel like it's taking a dark turn and you feel like your mental health is in trouble or your energy body is in trouble, I would say to leave. So it just means you have stronger boundaries. But again, it's not your job to save anyone, right? Okay, this is a member question. And by the way, such incredible questions today. I want to remind everyone also that if you like this, I do live Q&As just like this every 2 weeks on my website. We usually go for 3.5, sometimes 4 hours. So you can sort of even do 2 hours a week if you want, or an hour and a half a week. There's so much content on my website. I have hundreds of hours at this point of Q&As that are timestamped that you can look at. And that just helps me be able to come out here and provide free content like this. Also don't forget to sign up for the newsletter so you can see when I'm going to go live so you don't miss one, and any other things that I have coming out like Revival or the courses and things like that. All right. This is a member question. what exactly is imagination from a spiritual sense? Is it just us connecting with the astral and moon realm? Is it always a form of channeling in some sense? And if not, how does it manifest into channeled insights? This is a good question. What role does it play for humanity at this time in our development? Great question. So, when it comes to psychic power, they're classically divided into different categories, actually. And these different levels of psychic power are available the more that you evolve. So the more initiated you become, it's like the more psychic and spiritual power that you have. And imagination is sort of like the first level of psychic power. Now, in the anthroposophical system, this is very clearly laid out into 3 different levels of psychic power. The first one is called imagination, which this member I think is talking about. The second one is intuition, I think, and the third one is inspiration. So these are all different basically planes of psychic power that an individual can rise to embody, right? So the level of initiation that's called imagination, or the type of intuition that is under the umbrella of imagination, is a kind of very dreamy kind of intuition. This is the kind of intuition that you get when you're first opening up your abilities. Everything is a symbol, everything is an archetype, and you don't necessarily see the spiritual world as it is. You don't necessarily see people exactly as they are. So a lot of the times that'd be too overwhelming for us. We have to build up to that. We see it in the symbolic language. And in the anthroposophical system, this is also kind of like the lunar language, the lunar pictures. It's described that way, and it's associated with the astral body. And so the development of the astral body is probably one of the single most things that you can do to become more spiritual, more intuitive, have psychic powers, all that kind of stuff. It is specifically the purification of the astral body that allows you to have, inspirations and visions and feelings and seeing to the spiritual world and all that. That comes actually naturally from the purification of the astral body, which is the healing of yourself, essentially. So when you reach what in the anthroposophical system is called spirit self, in the Eastern system, this is called manas or higher manas. Those are synonymous. It's also called catharsis in some Western systems. When you get to that phase, the astral body is purified and you move beyond archetypal imaginations and you see the objective truth of the cosmos. Now, this is where the great teachers are, the Buddhas, things like that. They're no longer in the realm of imagination and symbols. They're actually seeing the objective truth of the world. That's where we get all these spiritual teachings that are so precise and the precise truths without symbols and stories, right? So that is that level of intuition and even inspiration. That's where really spiritual science comes from. It's the direct truth. It's not a symbol. It's not a archetype. It is the real thing that we would perceive as archetypes until we're ready, until the astral body is purified. So when somebody is channeling, depending on that person's level of initiation, they could be channeling basically more from that imaginative realm, or if they're more sort of pure, you can get more direct insights and more objective insights. So basically, the objectivity of the intuitive depends on the level of catharsis or purification they have within their astral body. Again, in anthroposophy, this is called the spirit self. In the Eastern systems, it's called manas or higher manas. So it's the purification of the human being, and that's what allows them to receive these spiritual forces as purely as possible. But in the beginning of psychic development and spiritual development, everything is a symbol and everything is in the world of imagination. But then eventually you can eventually go beyond that. Does that make sense? And with channeling is just everybody does it. Sometimes I'll hear like these very dogmatic Christian podcasts and stuff, and it's like you mention somebody, you know, getting a vision or seeing an angel or getting information, and it's like, this is evil. And it's like everybody does it. Everybody channels. Technically, everybody channels. It can be channeling something in a beautiful painting. It could be a spark of genius that leads to curing a disease. It could be actually seeing visions of the future, like in Revelations. Like the Bible is based on basically channeling. It's basically prophets. It's basically psychics, prophets that are bringing forth spiritual information. The same thing with all holy books. So every human being is designed to channel. We're designed to be vehicles for God, for Christ. We are designed for that. The difference is attunement. The issue is attunement. So everybody's a natural channel, but not everybody attunes to God. Not everybody attunes to the Christ being, to Christ. Not everybody does that. Some people are attuning, quite frankly, to demonic levels of existence, which is the easiest thing you could possibly do. And they deceive and they lie because they essentially want to feed on your energy. And you see that a lot more than you see well-attuned people going out there and talking. So the issue with channeling is not someone's channeling and someone isn't. Everybody channels. Everybody has a connection to God. The issue, again, it's not channeling. It's not being psychic. It's not being intuitive. Every single person is. You know, you get in your car and you have that feeling as though you shouldn't, you know, go to work today and there's a car accident. Everybody is psychic. Everybody is. The issue is not being psychic. We need it. It's part of how we've survived this far. The issue is attunement and being attuned to higher forces or lower forces. And that has to be very clear because I hear a lot of really wacky, weird stuff that just isn't sustainable as a theory or as a working system without completely denying your own connection to God and to angels, right? So channeling is an issue of attunement more often than not. And your level of attunement is based on how moral you are, how loving you are. It's based on how you've built up your psychic, your subtle bodies in past lives. A lot of things go into what makes someone a great prophet and what makes someone a degenerate person that just channels demonic things all day. There's massive teachings around this that discern one from the other. Okay, this next question is from Sarah. Hello, Sarah. And you said, would it be possible for you to provide more info on shadow people? I had an eerie experience where I was sleeping and saw a shadow humanoid figure standing by my bed and tried to approach me while I was sleeping. However, I panicked and ran away. Thank you for your guidance and helpful information. Wow, Sarah. I feel like a lot of people can probably relate at some point to seeing a shadow figure. And for anybody who doesn't know what a shadow figure is basically like a dark cloud, not really a cloud, but like a dark patch that sort of tends to, you can sometimes see them out of the corner of your eye if you're really sensitive. Or a lot of people will see them right when they're falling asleep. Like they'll be falling asleep and then they'll open their eyes and they'll see one of these figures. And that's also in the twilight period of falling asleep and then waking up. This is when sleep paralysis can happen, which is also often associated with sort of these dark figures. But you can also see them in your dreams as well. And so the answer to that can be a technical answer. And I actually covered this a little bit more in depth in the Q&A we did last week with my members, which is that the Earth is basically surrounded by what is called the moon realm, or it's sometimes called the lower astral plane in sort of New Age information. And so it's kind of like surrounding the Earth, we have this like dark dimension, right? We have this dark plane that is associated with the moon. The moon actually keeps it in place and keeps it in check. The moon forms the barrier, the planetary barrier of this plane. And it's also can be associated with the abyss, the mystery of the abyss, and the eighth sphere. This is also a parallel idea as well. And so there, within that plane, this lower astral plane is typically where all of the demonic entities are, or entities that are not purified or not loving enough to go beyond the moon, essentially. And so they're parasitic by nature. And all lower astral beings typically are if they're trapped there. And they operate by trying to attach to people, feed on people, which can eventually lead to classical possession. So unfortunately, that's kind of the spiritual makeup of our reality. And so they're not actually in the air. They're not actually in the atmosphere. It all exists here in a different consciousness. Not really like a different vibration, because it's not just physical matter vibrating faster. It's actually a different it's a different consciousness that they're living in relative to the Earth. So whenever we are asleep, whenever we fall asleep, whenever we are in between, we're actually for a moment being released into that world. So we're actually in that plane for a while before we move into the higher planes potentially. So sometimes in your life, you'll find yourself plagued by these darker experiences. And that could just have to do with going through a certain cycle. A lot of it can have to do with spiritual initiation, where you're sort of challenged by what can often be called the dweller at the threshold. The dweller at the threshold is the individual that stands between heaven and earth. And it can appear as a dark figure, and you're meant to overcome that. You're meant to kind of face it. And the only way you can face it is, well, one of the best ways is to understand the crucifixion, and to understand the mystery of Christ. Those are the best ways that's basically the only true way to overcome that effectively. Is that's how you overcome the dweller at our point in development. And so sometimes in your life, like that plane, you don't experience it very much, and you don't feel very challenged by it. Other times you'll go through periods where you are challenged by it. And these are times when we're supposed to confront our fears, and we're supposed to go very deeply into our being and allow God to really enter it. And so most people will have experiences eventually, especially if you're, actively spiritually developing, and you're intending to spiritually develop, you'll have times where you will meet the dweller. So I would look up more on the dweller at the threshold. There's sort of different figures that appear. One also is a reptilian lizard person. That's another etheric double that humanity has. The dark-robed figure is very popular as well. But these are also called kamarupas in Theosophy and in the Eastern system, these sort of dwellers that exist at the plane of the moon, these are also called Kamarupas, I believe. And they're sort of like fallen aspects of humanity. They're fallen etheric doubles of humanity that humanity has to face and confront in order to move forward. So sometimes you'll hear people just going crazy with all this like reptilian and lizard stuff. That is the etheric double from the Lemurian epoch that humanity still has not overcome, and so still haunts us in the astral world. It's not an alien, okay? It's the etheric double from the Lemurian epoch or from the Garden of Eden, in which Lucifer is repeatedly portrayed as a serpent. Okay, so that's the Luciferic etheric double. The Ahrimanic etheric double is the black robed figure that you can't see his face. That's typically how the Ahrimanic double appears. But we have these different etheric doubles, which are like guardians at the threshold that challenge us and frighten us, but they really represent a principle within us that we need to fully integrate. And when we integrate it, it goes away. Okay, so that's what these things are. And they're astral beings. They're lower astral things. There's also different demonic entities that will appear, and the way that they appear is also a kind of Kamarupa, representing different phases of human development that characterize their appearance. So there's really nothing truly that we can't understand that we experience spiritually or psychically. We have the tools to understand all of this. And it's just a matter of applying ourselves and all of that. So even though these experiences can be really scary and mysterious and weird, we can educate ourselves so that it's not so much of like a so you don't feel so vulnerable, because like quite frankly, I've had so many of those things myself, and you really feel helpless. Like if there is this creepy thing like literally looming over me, like what privacy do I have? You know what I mean? Like it's not a very pleasant feeling, but our power is in the reality that we can be centered. We can be centered with Christ in our heart. We can also be educated very well in occult science and know exactly what these things are. And that is our greatest power. It comes down to education and attunement. That's how we get through the darkest aspects. Because when we don't understand it, is when it gets really scary and really bad, because we don't know the magnitude of what's going on, especially with like things that seem like they can appear and disappear. So that education and alignment or attunement with Christ is so important. Okay. This next one is from Rowan Beauty. Hello, Rowan Beauty. Thank you so much for joining us today. How do you see the real difference between feeling and intuition? Are they actually the same? How do they work when channeling? Great question. So, feeling and intuition aren't the same, in my opinion, but intuition can come through feelings. So, what intuition, I would say, really is that information, pure information, will come to you from what you could say is the astral plane or the astral dimension, right? That comes into you through your etheric body, into your consciousness, and that's intuition. It's like a spark of information. Now, depending on the kind of psychic you are, you're going to interpret that different ways. That spark of intuition from the astral world could hit you as a vision. It could be a sound for you. It could be a feeling. It could be an emotion. It could be a thought, a pure thought form. That's called claircognizance. It could be a smell. It could be a taste. So our intuition uses our senses, but it's spiritual information. And like I said in the beginning of our journey, generally we will see it always as archetypal, though some things are direct. Typically, the visions and things can be more direct, but there's usually an archetypal level to it, usually. So in other words, when you are channeling, when you are getting information, not every feeling that you have is always going to be like accurate. Sometimes when you get information, there can be a lot of sort of your own ego that is splattered on it. So typically you have to work very, very hard as a psychic to remove as much of your ego as possible and create a very pure channel so that that force can come in as purely as possible without your biases, without your preconceived notions, because spiritual information actually most of the time, if it's really good, is going to challenge you. Some of the information that I've gotten, which I would consider my favorite or my best, has absolutely on the ground totally challenged everything I believed to be true and prepared me in certain ways that I couldn't even imagine. So usually when information's too comfortable, that can actually be sort of, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you should expect that if you're really, you should expect to be challenged by this work, is what I'm trying to say. There's some easy stuff too if you're already educated in certain things, but it should be challenging for you. So it's not always going to feel good, is what I'm saying. Some of the things could challenge your beliefs. So feeling and intuition can work through feeling. But intuition, in the sense that I think you mean, is basically just a pure impulse. Okay. This is a member question. What do you think of Jason Giorgiani's theory of a breakaway civilization? He describes an elite team of mostly European aristocrats who, via the discovery of zero-point energy in the late 1800s, or Steiner's Age of Michael, were able to time travel to our ancient past and Mars, and have been posing as gods and aliens to rule over and deceive us across time. I don't feel like I have heard this theory. I have seen a few of Jason Giorgiani's interviews, I think a few years ago, and I enjoyed them, but I'm not sure of this theory. So what people think overwhelmingly in the different sort of ancient alien stuff and new age stuff and ufology narratives, overwhelmingly what I see in that is basically people misunderstanding what happened in Lemuria and misunderstanding what happened in Atlantis. So most of the modern things that I see that are like, people built a time machine, people are communicating with aliens, most of that content overwhelmingly comes from just not understanding what actually happened in Lemuria, the condition of the earth and how the earth operated as an etheric body, mostly in those epochs, and had different laws around it. And so it's like a hyper-materialistic, literalist reimagination of our past. And generally with this stream that is all about sort of like the time machine stuff, what I see happening there is a very early transhumanism impulse, where instead of having to basically become a spiritual master or rise to become a bodhisattva, become a Buddha, instead you can just build this machine and you can go anywhere in time. Well, that is just trying to take the place of the role of a Buddha or a very exalted individual who you can eventually get to a point where you can have, a Merkaba, where you can actually do these things. It's not obvious to me at all that at any point in time a human being has developed technology that they can travel anywhere in time whenever they want based on a machine. That to me, I have yet to see. I hear it as a theory all the time, and you'll hear people talk about it very vaguely, but that to me is a red flag. While there may be a sort of black sun technology that can tear into the lower astral plane, and it may be able to do certain psychic things, right? I don't think at all for 1 second that can give humanity godlike powers, and that they can lift up out of time and go anywhere they want with it. I don't believe that at all. And it seems like a very early transhumanist ideology where humanity should eventually just focus on how to build these apparent machines instead of just building your resurrection body, or building, if you want to use Eastern terminology for resurrection body, your Vajra body, your diamond body, your immortal body. Our task is to build that body, which is beyond time and space, right? Which gives you all the incredible things that transhumanism tries to sell you as a cheap knockoff version of. So our goal is to develop immortality through spiritual development. I have a lecture on that called The Immortal Body, and I go into that process across traditions and the importance of building your resurrection body. That's the task. That's the goal. Why are we talking about having a weird machine that can do that, when in reality, you actually have to do it through your being, through your body, not a machine? So all of this is part of the Mars impulse. It's part of the transhumanism impulse, where more and more and more we're told that machines can do these spiritual things. A machine can go into any dimension. It's multidimensional machine. The aliens fly around in multidimensional technology. It's like, no, angels don't need machines. Okay? If you communicate with an angelic being, they just appear in your home. They're right here. They just make a shift and they're here. If you communicate with a master, a Buddha, they don't need to appear in your backyard in a spaceship. That's human stuff. That's deception. Okay, they don't do that. They don't need machines. But there is a weird hangover from Atlantis and secret societies who are obsessed with technology. They're possessed by beings that use the technology, and they want to tell you, and I'm not saying that Jason Giorgiani is doing this because I haven't read his theories. What I'm saying is there's a concerted effort to get you to spiritualize machines, you to spiritualize aliens, when in reality, they've been called angels for thousands of years. That's the translation. So this is all part of the spiritualization of machines and the merging of humans with machines. A lot of this stuff is just the religious system that they want to come about. And part of that is time travel. The future of humanity is traditionally portrayed as Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. So when you're looking at time, the angels of Venus that appear in Anthroposophy, that appear in Theosophy and earlier, those are angels. Those are angels that appeared in Lemuria. Those are angels even of Mars that appeared in Atlantis and just before Atlantis rose. Those are technically beings from the spiritual hierarchy. Those are angels classically. That's the rooted definition of them. That's using a definition that hasn't been just created in the last 10 years, right? Those are the words that allow you to truly understand in prior systems what we're looking at. Right? When we create words, we create new language, we're just separating our students from the classical language in which they can go study these things for themselves. So there is such a thing as zero-point energy, but also understand that the technology that we call zero-point energy, and there are several, that would have worked completely differently in concept and effect in Atlantis and earlier. The same phenomenon existed, but it would have operated differently because the earth wasn't yet as solid as it is now. So the beings that appear as gods in Lemuria, mainly of the Luciferic hordes, or the ones that fell through the Samael influence as well, or the Mars influence just before Atlantis came about, rose from the sea, those were fallen angels. Those weren't aristocratic people that were Nazis. Those are angels. Those are spiritual beings, because what happens is that the earth constantly receives the impulses of angels. The earth is not a closed system, it's an open system. And so we're always receiving heavenly impulses. And in earlier periods in our development, especially in which the earth was not yet solid, please see my lectures on the esoteric keys of disclosure on this, the first 2 lectures. The earth is not yet solid, so different things were possible, but we still refer to these things, but we cannot understand them from a material perspective. So all those gods that appeared are what we would call angels. Angels that are not fallen and angels that are fallen. They're part of the spiritual hierarchy, in which humanity is also part of that hierarchy at a lower level, right? When humanity passes the initiation of the earth, life on earth, they'll rise and become an angel, and then archangel, and then archai. And each one of these states of initiation of the human being in the anthroposophical system, or in the Western system, is associated with a planetary sphere. So the angelic level is associated with the planet Jupiter. The archangelic is associated with Venus and also the sun. And then beyond that, the archai level is associated with Vulcan, even Saturn, to a degree. So when people start saying aliens, they're trying to communicate the different levels of the spiritual hierarchies, which are rooted in planetary spheres. So do you see how this gets very weird and convoluted? And Mars affected the Earth right before Atlantis was created. But the Earth and humanity had already been existing on the planet for 3 prior epochs. The beginning of humanity was hardly the age of Mars, or the age of the Anunnaki that people say, and things like that's hardly the beginning of humanity. Humanity had already been existing for several planetary cycles before the Anunnaki story even begins. So, European aristocrats using time machines to pose as gods. Well, there were actual angels and actual fallen angels that were real beings. And the fallen angels and the dark forces on the world that work through demonic entities and these dark fallen beings, those are the elite. And they want more than anything to basically tell you that they're God. So any stories that you hear that are all about, like, life came from Aldebaran, the gods came from Aldebaran, the gods came from Mars. This is all basically a fallen angel mess to redefine human origins, right? And get you to place these elite people, these people that are basically part of the Mars line. They believe this too, because unfortunately, a lot of the people that get caught up in this, they believe the Mars origin myth. They believe the alien god ideology. And the cincher for a lot of people who get high up in these societies that propagate this in the world, the thing that always cinches them is they get shown this artifact, this technology that is from an earlier period. So they'll tell you this massive lie about human origins and aliens creating humanity and all this kind of stuff. And then they'll be like, look, here's the proof. And then they'll have this advanced technology. Well, guess what? That technology is really Atlantean technology, right? Not alien, Atlantean. The Earth had various prior epochs before our current epoch, in which we had advanced technology, in which the deluge destroyed. But there are certain groups that have retained the formulas for the technology and even aspects of the technology. One group The dark group, the fallen group associated with Mars and Lucifer and all this kind of stuff, they are trying to use that technology, because it's really all they have, to get you to believe a new origin myth. There's a good way that we can go in the future with technology that's healthy, okay? That is peaceful. We can advance. Or we can go into this bizarre Mars stuff, this bizarre technological dystopia that is just a recapitulation of the Atlantean era when they tried this before. For more information, please check out my Mars Mysteries series and my Esoteric Keys of Disclosure. Each one is organized in a playlist on this channel. So, no. Mars and a lot of the different planetary spheres that were closer had different things appear on them naturally, but also during the Atlantean epoch. It's us. It's not aliens. And this whole alien thing seems crazy to a lot of people, except for the fact that there are individuals that are part of certain secret groups that are depending on this. They're depending on you to be ignorant of it. And they're depending on people worshiping technology. Technology can go anywhere in time. Aliens created humanity. Technology can heal your body, and all of it is just slowly getting you to channel your energy, your soul, outside of yourself, further and further into technology. It's a transhumanist alien ideology. It is Antichrist. It's Antichrist. That's what that is. Now, I don't know if that's what Mr. Giordani is saying. I have not read his theories, but for me, the people are not gods, and there were absolutely different angels that did fall at certain times. Those were not like European elite. They would love for you to think that they are. I mean, think about it. The real dark elite would love for you to think that they have such advanced technology that they can go anywhere in time, that they're the gods of the past. This is what they want you to think. Now, yes, you can do incredible things through technology, but to think that they have a handle on this technology so that it's so precise they can go anywhere in time and all this, that is too far. That is several bridges too far. Yes, they have certain technologies that can tear holes in the moon realm, but that's a far cry from having control over that technology, being able to exert that technology to a reasonable conclusion every time. It's chaotic for them, right? So that's what I would say there. So the aspect of like wanting to deceive us across time, that's fallen angels. Fallen angels are the beings that lead to deception. They possess people, and the people become basically their proxies on Earth, basically. So if that's what he's saying, then I would agree with that. Okay. Geneviève, do fairy-human hybrids exist? What level of consciousness would a fairy have had to achieve before incarnating as a human? Thank you. Okay, so there was a weird thing, getting back to Atlantis, about hybridization, and it does appear like humanity gets to a certain point in their epoch where they will eventually try to play God, and they'll eventually try to create people. They'll try to create beings, just like how the Elohim essentially projected themselves downwards to create us. So eventually, usually it gets to a point where humanity tries to do that. And so there is a problem with hybridization, genetic modification near the end of every epoch we've existed in. Happened in Atlantis. It's happening now with the mad scientists trying to create these different hybrid animal things and hybridize people with machines. It's just playing God behavior. And so that is definitely a part of our past and also our present. Think about this thing. That thing is modifying. That's the same ideology as the, Anunnaki who came here and started splicing human genes with monkey genes, and these beings that apparently come to the earth to genetically modify. This is the same religion, it's the same ideology, it's the same impulse of fallen angels that do this. It's just repeating itself, and we have to catch on to that and understand the esoteric level of all of this. Okay, the same forces that are apparently saying they created humanity, which they didn't, right? See Mars Mysteries for that, or my lectures on this for that, are also wanting to do this. And all of that, it's the same beings, it's the same impulse, it's just repeating, okay? So the hybridization thing is actually a very big deal we have yet to fully confront. Very degenerate thing going on there. But the fairy is interesting because when you look at it in the Celtic culture, fairy is typically used to describe angel. Like in earlier civilizations that were more pagan, there wasn't really a difference in language between angel and elemental, because the angels basically operate through elementals. So that's why when you see the word diva in the Eastern tradition and you look it up, it sort of refers to elemental beings, which means beings of nature. So like sylphs, gnomes, salamanders, Udines, all those forces of nature. Those are divas, but they're also sometimes called angels as well. It's only as humanity evolves and begins to individuate and become sort of their own real human being that we begin to see the higher spiritual hierarchies as they are, and not just as a force in nature. So eventually humanity gets to the point where they have more of an objective view rather than an imaginative view of the spiritual forces. And so as you move more and more into Western esoterica, you get dissertations on the spiritual hierarchies or the angelic hierarchies, especially through Dionysius. You start to see this human kingdom of life, which makes up the supernatural world. Whereas before, the supernatural world and the natural world and the subnatural world were all kind of one. And that's typical for paganism. It's typical for the earlier traditions where we didn't really see the beings behind it yet. And it's typical also for the weird materialist stuff where the world's a simulation and it's just waves and particles, not realizing that that is an entity, that's a being, okay? That's what that really is. So it's still that pagan idea of not being able to see the beingness and still seeing things as in a subnatural way. You're not yet seeing the supernatural reality, which is that we live in a world of beings within beings. So now using the Western system, which identifies the spiritual hierarchies precisely as different hierarchies of angels, in which humanity is, underneath angel, trying to get to the level of angel, of immortality. We can see that basically a fairy would be an elemental. And the elemental beings are essentially, you could see them as like the spirits behind nature. They're still united with all kingdoms above, but they would have to go through all the higher kingdoms of life, before they're human. So an elemental being has to go through the mineral level, the plant level, the animal level, and then they'll be human. After all those incarnations where they take on the properties of that kingdom of life, and the human being is the culmination of all the kingdoms of life beneath it. Okay. This next question is from Zoe. Some say we should view demonic beings as beings. Others say they are only the absence of light, only substantiated through our relationship to them, like monsters in dreams. What do you believe to be true? demonic beings are beings. They're actually entities that objectively exist in the lower astral world. They're not really, see, this is the thing about, there's a real movement to make everything like inhuman and like once removed. And so basically trying to make, there's a real push to try to make good and evil the same thing and to make evil relative. Let's just get down to brass tacks about a lower astral demonic entity. Okay? If you run into a lower astral demonic entity, that entity is not a neutral force. That entity, if it can perceive you, is going to do everything that it can to dominate you and possess you because they're parasitic. Is being parasitic neutral? If something sees you, you're lunch to that entity. They're predators. Is being predatory neutral? No, it is what we define things as evil. In occult science, we say that if something wants to attach and suck your life force out of you and take over your body, we classify that as evil. That's destroying your life. That's not neutral. So what happens is that people want to enter into spirituality because they understand that they should, but they don't want to confront evil. They don't want to actually understand it. They want spirituality to be a lullaby. They want it to be something that they go into in order to feel better. It's not. The supernatural world is a place that exists that has dark and light in it. The darkness is called dark because it's the energy of death, and the beings there are parasitic. If something's kind of new, doesn't really know where it's going, it's typically depicted as gray. But that's not very great either because it's gray, and it could very well just turn dark. So when we see a demonic being, that is not a neutral being. They're not just going to walk by you, right? Neutrality is like not going to disturb you, doesn't really matter, whatever. If a demonic entity can perceive you, they're going to do everything they can to feed on you. They're predators, they're parasites. Being parasitic is not neutral. That's aggressive. So they're actually far from neutral. Demonic entities are aggressive because they're parasitic and they're predators. That's how that works. But you can learn to deal with them, right? You can learn how to have boundaries, how to have power. You can become educated. You can become properly attuned so that over time, when you do see them, it can actually be like you just move on from it. It doesn't have to be this horrific experience. It could be shocking, right? But it doesn't have to be like this awful, horrible thing, right? So the more educated you are, the more attuned you are, the more experienced you are, it just becomes something that you have to deal with, right? And that's just the realistic answer. That's the answer that's not trying to make you feel better. That's the answer that's just telling the truth. Because there's so much information now in modern spirituality that's designed to get you to just feel better. Because if you feel good, that means you're going to give that creator money. That means you're going to keep watching. That's like, what is it, hopium? Spiritual bypassing? People just create content just to be in the algorithm because they just want you to give them money. So be careful with people that just tell you everything that you want to hear and that make spirituality some kind of dream world where there is no negativity, there is no darkness. Right? That's not reality. And that actually creates a dangerous place for people because they don't know how to deal with it when they encounter it because they're told that it's neutral and it doesn't exist. Now, if you want to talk about preparing your life and preparing yourself so that you have more control, that's another story. But the fundamental nature of a demonic entity is parasitic. It is demonic by nature. It is a predator. So it's not neutral. Doesn't mean that you can't understand why they can perceive you, which is always based on your wounds. You do have to understand the level that we kind of attract these things when we don't do our self-work. But that doesn't make them neutral because we have sort of attracted them in our life by slacking on our self-work or by not being aware of a part of ourself. Okay. Member question. What is the significance of turning 33? Does something special happen around that time? Does something unlock? I know Steiner was 33 when he published The Philosophy of Freedom. Is there a certain age we should begin to be teachers if called to do it? There actually is a secret behind 33. Obviously, there's 33 degrees in Freemasonry and things like that, but the 33 represents the merging of the sun and the moon. And it is said in different occult teachings that at 33 is when the Bodhisattva emerges within the human being. And that's when you sort of are, that's when you, if you are at the level of Bodhisattva, that is apparently when your mission comes upon you. It doesn't mean that you're not insightful before that or spiritual before that, but at that age, typically, if you're at a certain level of initiation, that's when everything compiles and comes upon you. And that's when you step into your mission and you become aware of a certain level of your initiation. It's at that age, typically. And obviously, we've had some of the best minds looking at the philosophy of freedom. And a lot of people, they're just trying to understand it because Steiner was the reason why Rudolf Steiner's work is so loved by so many is that he actually came into mysticism from the most grounded, anchored place of scholarship. He was editing Nietzsche and was a doctor, so so he was a philosopher and he went through the regiments of scholarship. So that's very unique because a lot of mystics come from the dream world and they come through just pure mysticism. But what made Rudolf Steiner different is that he really came from that grounded place of scholarship. And that's why his work is so adored and why it's so practical, is because it's just very rare to have a mystic that is also so well developed intellectually as he was. So yeah, if there's a certain age for teachers, there used to classically be an age in which people would teach. So usually they used to say that you didn't start teaching until you were 40, actually. And it wasn't until that time that the individual had gone through all of their transits astrologically, and that was when you could talk about spiritual topics. But that is not observed today. I don't actually think it would be possible to do that. I think teaching is a little bit differently now. But there were typically in mystery school certain times when teachers would come about, and it was much more I would say curated than now. We're in a different period now. Okay, this one is from James. When we reincarnate, is it always forward in future from the last life, or do we jump around the timeline? Do we ever relive the exact same life with the opportunity to make different choices? We don't relive the exact same life. It's not possible, but we will, if we have different themes that are not confronted, not transformed, the karma of that will exist within the subtle bodies, sort of you could say, astral and etheric energies and elemental energies that are associated with the earth. So when you come back around, when you incarnate, those astral and etheric and elemental energies make up your subtle bodies. and you live a life in that epoch, repeating some of the themes until you can clear them totally. So that's how that works. So there really isn't reliving the same life or going back. It's really just that the same patterns are repeated until we learn how to master them, but we repeat them in different developmental epochs according to those laws and developments that happen. Okay, this question is from Patricia. I've been studying Steiner's founding a science of spirit. Founding a science of the spirit. In the book, Steiner speaks of a soul's time after death in Kamaloka and Devachan. Does the soul or astral body come in contact with other souls during Kamaloka or Devachan? Is the soul alone during this time? Great question. Okay. So yes, you're always surrounded by other beings. When you're in Kamaloka, you are surrounded by angels. Oftentimes, even there can be deceased relatives that come around you. And your whole time in heavenly experience is surrounded by angels, surrounded by souls. It is, Kamaloka in particular can feel very lonely because the whole purpose of that is to basically release ourselves from the material plane. So you may not notice individuals around you because it's sort of a very inward time. But especially when you move up to Devachan and you move through the higher spheres, you're absolutely meeting with different spiritual and individualities. We have a meeting with Christ also. We are going through incredible decompression and inspiration. We're moving through the different spheres in the heavens, and we're having experiences in every single sojourn. We're having an experience with individuals and beings in the Mercury sphere, in the Venus sphere, in the Sun sphere, in the Jupiter sphere, in the Mars sphere. And all of that is preparing again to come back into the earthly sphere. So we are surrounded by really our spiritual family that we're separated from here, really. Okay, this is a member question. I'm part of Eastern lineages for energy cultivation. Western sources like Steiner support a rational state, useful in balancing powerful energetics. But Steiner can contradict himself. People see him as gospel. I don't see the gospels as gospel, but Steiner certainly did. Can't we let go of this today? It's just someone's belief that happens to be written down. Okay. So I personally don't see Steiner as being gospel. I see that. So I think one of the things that happens is like you find a teacher who spent their life basically teaching about spirituality, right? Whether it be Steiner or Blavatsky or even an Eastern teacher. So let's use Steiner, for example. So Steiner didn't write Anthroposophy out of his imagination or his imaginative consciousness. What Anthroposophy is, and really what any real occult system is the same spiritual principles, the same laws, the same structure exists in every single religious system. Every spiritual system ultimately has the same esoteric laws within it. The only difference between East and West is that humanity has basically evolved into different conditions and states, but the spiritual science behind it is the same. Okay, so there actually really is no difference between East and West. There's nothing that exists in Eastern mysticism or the Eastern mysteries that doesn't exist in the West. They're just different approaches because humanity was in a different condition at the time. Now, I've gone into the differences of this. You can read different works on the differences between East and West and Esoterica. It's all out there. But the spiritual science is the same behind both. So when you get to somebody like Rudolf Steiner, a huge portion of what he's doing is just teaching occult science. He's just teaching the same things that is mentioned in Theosophy. Before that, the same science is talked about in the Bhagavad Gita and the different Eastern traditions. So it's just a massive portion of the work is just that. For example, it is the fact that the Earth is divided into 7 planetary stages, into 7 epochs. We have 7 cultural ages which we move through. You know, this is no different in the Eastern tradition than the breaths of Brahma and the Manvantaras. It's the same thing, except for the more Western you go to in the approach, the more objective the teachings become, and we move into spiritual science. And the more Eastern you go, the more subjective the experiences tend to be, but the objective aspect is still there. So there really is no competing between the East and West, as many people like to make it, right? It's really just the same thing, you know, but it is how we've approached it has changed because we evolve. Just like in 1,000, 2,000 years, we will have even more in-depth systems, and we'll look back at Steiner, or we'll look back at the Christian system and we'll be like, well, that was then. So there's an evolution of consciousness, but there's a spiritual occult science that remains what it is throughout, no matter what humanity thinks of it. So when we look at Anthroposophy, which it was created by Rudolf Steiner, Anthroposophy means the wisdom inside the human being. And again, a large portion of that is just occult science that you can find behind every single tradition. That was the point, right? Then he also adds his own views. He has his own visionary elements to it, but he also supports that information with historical points and different things like that. And you're free to take that on or not. But the structure of Anthroposophy is not just something that he like locked himself in a dark room and channeled or something. That is the perennial wisdom. That is the wisdom that actually exists as the esoteric counterpoint behind every tradition, right? And now, as for dogmatism, dogmatism is discouraged. I think one of the problems with the New Age and a lot of individuals is that if you use a system, so if you use Anthroposophy, if you use Theosophy, if you use an Eastern system, if you use esoteric Buddhism or something like that, then people think that you're dogmatically engaging with that system. So if you use a system, people automatically think that you're like religious about it. And it seems like there's people who don't understand that you can quote a system, that you can reference a teacher and still think for yourself. It's not like because people like Anthroposophy that they just get like absorbed into it and become a robot or something. You know, the whole point of being able to be spiritually developed, right, is being able to look at Eastern mysticism and take from that what you like while giving it the respect it deserves, understanding what it's saying and everything like that, and then being able to go into another system and say, I see the truth here. But you're not depending on that system to give you the truth. What you're depending on is your own inner wisdom that is appearing to you as a reflection in these different systems. So the core, the anchor of truth that you're actually using is within you. And you're just looking at different systems and other people's writings and other people's contributions to allow you to understand the truth within your being. In the Steiner system, that is called anthroposophia. Anthro meaning human, Sophia wisdom. That's the wisdom within the human being. So literally, even the name of that system is directing you not towards the system itself, not towards dogmatically following Rudolf Steiner or anyone, but instead to the wisdom inside of you. So again, just because you enjoy reading the work of other spiritual teachers, or because you choose a system to use, and by the way, choosing a system is great because that allows depth. If somebody is just flitting around like a butterfly, never really getting deeply into any system at all, that's a weaker way of studying because you're not getting any depth, because your brain and your whole system is flooded with different language and different time periods in which these systems were written, it is actually better when you're trying to understand the spiritual world to study one system for an extended period of time. And once you have a good grasp of that system, to then study other systems. So the studying of different people's work makes you better. It makes you stronger. But it should be very obvious at this point that you should not be reading anybody's work, Rudolf Steiner's work, Theosophy, the Bible, anything Taoist. You should not be going into that and being like, this is now my mind. Like, all I'm going to do is dogmatically, read Rudolf Steiner and just go into it like a robot. I think a lot of that actually comes from fear within individuals of becoming dogmatically obsessed with something. Because the only way to really understand the wisdom that is within you, to get it out, is to see what other people are saying and have said. We're not an island. We can't do it all ourselves. You can't channel the structure of the universe yourself, right? We need each other. We need the greats that have come here and dedicated their life to teaching. And there are many in the Eastern tradition. The Eastern tradition is rich with incredible teachings. There's incredible Eastern masters. True, I'm not really an Eastern teacher. I'm a Western teacher. I'm a Western student. But that doesn't mean I don't have incredible appreciation for the East and read it all the time, right? It's just my chosen stream that I resonate most is mystical Christianity. But that's not at the expense of the East. How I see it is that there's nothing that exists in the Eastern stream that already isn't in that, because they're fundamentally the same stream, evolving over time. Right? So that's what I would say there. And then we should not glorify anyone to a perfected state. There's no like glorifying people, including Rudolf Steiner. But I do feel it is important to use a system or to refer to systems, because that's what's going to give you the structure to understand your own inner wisdom, your own knowledge, right? And everybody should choose one that they resonate with. Okay, this is our last question of the day, and then we're going to do super chats and shout outs. Don't forget, I'm here every 2 weeks also on my website, where I go for longer and we just dive into all of your questions, whatever you want to know. A lot of the time also, there's just certain topics that I can't really get into on YouTube. Like, you just can't really talk about certain things. So that's a good way also to talk about these things with other community members, but also have deeper conversations than you can have here. All right. Okay, last question goes to Kelly. What do you think is the safest, healthiest, and most energetic healing way to nourish ourselves at this time? So confused and sick of being poisoned. I'm attracted to carnivore, but seem so conflicted. I completely agree with this. I was just watching, I went down like you know how you can kind of go down these rabbit holes on social media where as soon as you click on one health related video, there's just all of these different like health stuff that comes your way. And then you just like get more and more hopeless and more depressed, because it just seems like last week, Bill Gates releases millions of mosquitoes filled with God knows what, and then like, don't wear your yoga pants anymore because they're made out of plastic. And like, I just heard something awful the other day, which was that apparently there were these, I don't know if this is true, I haven't had a chance to research it, but apparently there were these like young boys all in one city, in one high school, and they ended up developing like early onset Parkinson's, which is like unheard of. It's a degenerative disease that usually appears in older people. And doctors were like, oh my gosh, why do these young men have this? And they found out that there were basically like ecstasy tablets that had some kind of neurotoxin in them that caused Parkinson's. And of course, the only way in which these neurological disorders can be fixed is with brain chips. That's like the only hope at this point. So it just seems like there are so many devious things going on because we've just become so out of touch with nature. And there's a whole portion of the population that literally thinks that they're gods and they want to play God. And there's so much weird stuff going on, and our generations are directly confronting it. And it's so easy to get bogged down with it all. But I think the best thing that you can do begins with having a strong meditation practice so that your nervous system isn't constantly in overdrive. So you really want to be able to regulate the nervous system. You want to have a meditation practice. You want to be checking in with yourself all the time to make sure that your nervous system isn't just like, fried. And so once that happens, you want to use your intuition and the intuition of your body to let you know what foods work with you and what don't. One of the biggest mistakes that I think can happen is people think that if a diet works for your friend or a diet works for a family member, that's going to be the diet that works for you. And that's just not the case. So you have to find the diet and the foods that work for you and what you could be allergic to or what is bad for you. And the only way you can find that is through trial and error. So you have to basically feel into your body and see what foods you think are nourishing you, that your body is good with, and what ones are bad. Generally, across the board, refined sugar is not going to be good for you, or anything that turns into refined sugar, like white carbs and stuff like that. That's generally going to feed parasites. It's going to feed candidas, overgrowth in your body. That will cause brain fog, weight gain, all this kind of stuff. It's going to make you feel bad. So generally a good place to start is removing that from your diet. That's the one thing that I've heard people remove across the board that they have incredible luck with. It seems like white refined sugar and refined foods, anything that's really heavily refined seems to be the one thing we can all agree on that's bad for us. So the more synthetic, the more refined, the more you want to stay away from it. When it comes to like removing and becoming carnivore, that's something that you could definitely try. And just do trial and error there. And that's what I would do there, because everybody's different and everybody has different bodies, right? So you have to listen to your body. And some people can handle dairy, some people can't. Some people can handle all kinds of garlic and onions, and other people it's horrible for them. So people are also becoming a bit more allergic to different things. So simple diets do tend to be very good. But what I would do is I would definitely trust what your body says, and go with that, and be willing to make changes, be willing to add things, take things away. But there's not one diet, but generally avoid synthetic processed foods, sugars, things like that. That's a great place. Like if you're eating those things, first cut those out and then go from there, adding and taking things away to see how you feel the best. Get enough water, go nature. Sometimes it's the most simple things. Breathe properly. Like so many times we're just not oxygenated enough. It's like, man, I feel so bad, but I'm breathing so shallowly. So also watch your breath too. So that's that. Okay. All right, guys. So thank you everybody for joining me today. And look at that. Thank you, Dario Darkangelo. These are the super chats. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter to know when I am going to appear here. I have a bunch of new content rolling out for you this fall. I have courses coming. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And I will do some shout outs here. I think I can see the comment section. I usually don't have the comments open because I don't want to be distracted. So hello, Trident Vibes. Hello, Metal Valkyrie. Metaman Jovi. Brian. Hello, Pono. Golden Girl. Good advice, Gigi. The forest is a great detox as well. Thank you, everyone. Take care and blessings. Nature emits sort of the true energy of the earth. The more synthetically we live, the easier it is to fall into disassociation. It's easier to lose our center. And it's crazy how just like going into nature can just bring you back into yourself because it is the harmony of God. And so just take off your shoes. Yes, we're going to get a little bit hippity dippity do. Just take off your shoes, walk around, drink clean water, breathe the air, return to nature, return to that energy, and you'll be surprised at how much your nervous system relaxes, how much you come into attunement, how much you slow down. Moving water is great. It has negative ions, all of that. Yes, Brian went for a 10K hike today. Wow, that's incredible. I went for a walk this morning, but it was not 10K. But I did in my mind save 2 turtles because there were these beautiful box turtles, and I always see them on the path that I walk. And every once in a while, I'll see them and they get hit by a car. And so whenever I see them, I like to pick them up. This is what Wolf taught me. You pick up the box turtle because they like to lay their eggs in the rocky little shoals on the side of the road sometimes too. Like you'll see them like going to make their little nest there because they don't know that that's the most dangerous place to make their little nests. But you can see them trying to dig their little holes for their eggs. So I don't disturb them when they're doing that, but when they're on the road and they're trying to cross, I always relocate them. And just being in nature is just like, wow, it just brings you back. Oh, I see Psychic Somatics out there. Thank you so much, Psychic Somatics, for being a wrench and helping us. We couldn't do it without you. So grateful for Psychic Somatics out there. She also does wonderful videos as well. Oh, someone's calling me on my computer. Okay, guys. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dawn Vibrations, Golden Girl, Dean Davis, Trident Vibes, Scarlet Fire, T Mantel, and Just a Man. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you so much. I will be back here very soon. And I will give you guys, thank you, Doyle Wayne. I will give you guys back the rest of your Sunday. Get out in nature, have some fun. I will see you very soon.